Thank you so much, Mr. Jalop. Ms. Vila must be commitment Minister. Zithetha relevant to what we are looking for. Its responsibility is on the national leadership of the student, the national leadership, your professionals, as well as the mother body of the institute, to ensure that these commitments that are presented today become reality. They don't end up in this room. They go throughout South Africa and internationally. We hear that there are programs that the department is engaged internationally in partnership with other institutes. So it's important that we sit down, we craft the plan on the way forward and ensuring the implementation. When all the hype that is busy now holding the political offices goes like the we take the processes forward. In the upper, they really become a reality, and that reality is not going to be solved by having a resolution of the conference only. We need to have follow-up meetings to develop a clear plan to implement this commitment. Before I just want to call Mr. Robert Mongwe, the convener of the Human Settlement in the University of Fort Hare, just to take 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes of our time before we can break for lunch. You know, I'm not sure whether Mr. But I know that I'm going to my eye here and from the direction. I think the students are
Thank you very much. I do not have much to say because I'm not speaking on behalf. I'm speaking on behalf of the Dean of the Social Sciences and Humanities, Professor Neil Duros, who could not be with us today due to some family engagements. So to that extent, I've been asked to come and say a few words. Before I say anything, I would like to say all protocol observed. I acknowledge the VC, the Minister of Human Settlement in absentia, the MEC for Human Settlement in absentia, our international collaborators, the Institute and its various wings. I would not, without really meaning anything, in particular, when we think about the Institute, I know that Professor Banga and Mr. Tom Stewart, Mr. Ramashemule, those kind of people come a long way as far as the University of Fort Hare and the University of Nelson Mandela. This is really an important day. Before I even start my speech, I also want to say that through their leadership, we also have some international collaborations. We have the Consulate General of the USA South Africa collaboration with Scotland. I think very important. UN Habitat representatives. Ladies and gentlemen, please indulge yourselves. You are at home at Fort Hare. As someone has said, Fort Hare is a home away from home. Welcome. And I say this on behalf of the VC who has spoken, as well as the executive team. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are here because of the students. And by saying so and saying last, I mentioned them last because they are the reason why we are here. The idea of a human settlement conference hosted by Fort Hare comes as far back as 2016. It's an idea which we spoke about, conceptualized, fought for, and so on. And several years later, it indeed materializes. But it materializes in a very interesting way. It materializes at a time when we're putting the students and young professionals at the heart of it. So, whereas all this time we're saying Fort Hare should host a conference, I think it pleases my heart more than anything to see that when this ultimately materializes, we're focusing on the people who matter the most, the students. I've always said to my students that, you always see me in front of you and telling you this and that, shouting at you sometimes. The reason I do that is because I know that when I move away from this chair, you must sit at it. You are the one who must sit and say, this research program is not workable. So, you are the one who must say, this is not correct. The argument is poor. The practice is not correct. What about gender equality and those kinds of things? You are the ones who must say those things. Now, this goes to the heart of what this conference is all about: capacity development. I think that the universities are indeed at the forefront of capacity development, because through education, specifically university education, which must produce people who are well educated, who are reflective and critical. In other words, people who do not just have the tools of the trade, people who not just have this or that skill, but people with a moral conscience and people who know how to use those skills. Today, with this conference, starting and right for the 3 days, we will see and think about how to make human settlement a practice, both in terms of theory and in terms of actual practice on the ground. How can we make these things to change people's lives? We know that the question of housing and human settlement is the third greatest challenge for South Africa. The first one is unemployment. The second one is education. And the third one is housing and human settlement development. And I think from where I sit, those questions are completely intertwined. In other words, you cannot separate the one from the other. And from a human settlement perspective, this is why we need to develop capacity in young people through education, but not for them to go to the government with a head in hand and say, we are looking for a job. We want them to approach the government to say, here we are capable, we know what we are doing, we are confident, we have been trained, make use of us. This is the kind of person we want to produce through our education. And secondly, we want people who want to say, here we are capable, we are educated, give us business, the aspect of entrepreneurship. So we're not just saying we want to produce civil servants only. We are also saying we want people who have initiative to be able to lead, become business leaders. People always talk about the human settlement value chain. And the human settlement value chain has to do with everything from, we can summarize it as the A to Z of human settlement development process. And throughout the entire process, we want everyone to be involved. And today, this is the opportunity when we are beginning to talk about how best can we make our students, some of whom are first-year students, second-year students, some of whom are young professionals, to actually have a meaningful contribution to the development of human settlements in South Africa. In other words, we are convened here today to talk about how you, the students, can actually help us resolve one of the third biggest challenge in South Africa. And this is why this gathering is important. With those words, I really want to thank, on behalf of the VC, on behalf of the Executive Dean, everybody who has made this possible, the Institute for Approaching Fort Hare, my colleagues in the department for embracing the idea of allowing Fort Hare to host the conference, the students who have actually agreed to prepare papers, which they will be presenting tomorrow, our former students, who are, some of whom are in employment, some are not, but for the mere fact that they agreed to come and share this moment with us, we are very, very grateful. We are grateful of our international partners. But most importantly, we are grateful to the people who worked day and night to make this conference a success, including external partners such as the U.S. Consulate General, the National Institute of Social Sciences and Humanities, HALE, the National Department of Human Settlement, the Provincial Department of Human Settlement, and all other people who have contributed in every way that they could. I thank you very much.
I'm not trying to settle scores here. I know that we had an agreement that at 10 past 12 you're supposed to be seated, and you didn't keep that promise. I committed just now that I'm taking you to lunch. Somebody whispered to me that one of the speakers was supposed to be online is now online. Can we just allow that person, and then after that we are going to break for lunch?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Madam Director, and also for the conference for the indulgence. Mine is very precious to introduce our international guest, who is set up elsewhere in the globe to make an input in this important occasion. That is, this person is an urban and regional planner by professional background with lifelong interest or long-standing interest on matters of human settlement, in particular in respect of how it has been affected presently by climate change. He has been a director for physical planning in the University of Ibadan for renders him into a academic. He is not just a planner with theory, he has applied theory in practice and can make sense about it. Of course, he's a scholar, an astute scholar in the field of urban and regional planning, and was a past president and the chairperson of the Association of African Planning Schools in Africa. I mean, serving a number of organizations also, including the Geosphere of Biodiversity, the chapter of the Nigeria, as part of the international body of that discipline of management, has also served in the UN Habitat Safer Cities program, and I think widely published with 14 books behind his name, and also over 100 peer-reviewed journal articles in local international journals. Yeah, I think that person is the one that South Africa attracted until 2020 to be the chair for human settlements innovations in the Mangosuthu University. He is a friend, he is a brother, and we talk as Professor Samuel Batunde Abola. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Hello, I need a feedback.
Oh, yes.
Yes, we hear you.
Thank you so much. Professor Abola has been introduced. Maybe for me, I'm standing for him. He has audience all now today. Because we are culturally in tune in Nigeria, the monarchy of this town died, so we have to do a whole lot of our arrangement, and because it's central to the city development, so he traveled to go and attend to that. So he brings his greeting, he sends his apology in, and because he holds this program so important to him, he has prepared, and I'm just here to stand for him, and I think I will try as much as possible to do justice to what he has assigned me to do. I know, being him, his presentation will be full of flavor, value, and everything that is attached. Again, maybe you just take me as I am. I'm going to speak through what he has sent to me. If you're hearing me, just believe in your mind that you're hearing me. I don't know how the presentation is going to be. Am I sharing my screen from here, or it will be done for me from there?
Yes.
Okay. Something. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So today, the responsibility given to me and him is for us to look at housing, the place of housing as a profession, and how we can make that professionalism be something that will drive human settlements. Maybe just a way of introduction, when you look at human settlements, housing is strategic to it. But within that strategic arrangement for human settlements, there is no defined discipline that's responsible for housing. And when you have that kind of disconnect between the housing, which is central, and there is no agreed element on how those housing issues, which is affecting everybody. Listening to the last speaker said housing is the third important thing in South Africa, education, employment, and housing. When you have the two, and you still don't have where to rest your mind, I think, as he concluded, that you can't run away from the brain. They are really strategic, and until we can look at this strategic relationship, we will be driving the process of having a sustainable human settlement without the necessary arrowhead to drive it. So as a way of introduction, this is the outline for the course of the program, or for my presentation today. We want to look at housing, we want to conceptualize it. We want to look at how we can make housing a profession. We want to look at how are we going to drive this process. We want to look at the context at which various people have looked at housing as a discipline, and then we want to look at how do we now professionalize housing within the context of human settlement. Then we conclude and then we recommend. So as introduction, we need to ask ourselves this pointed question, which is strategic or central to whatever we want to say today. Is housing a profession? You look back, maybe you just conceptualize them, you look at architecture, it is a profession. You look at urban and regional planning, it is a profession. You look at the one that we are all teaching, it is a profession. Why is housing not a profession? Where these elements that will give back to housing itself as professional body that is running it or is being professionalized. The process, the outcome of that professionalism has no direction. We need to be asking ourselves, why are we in this position? Then, in trying to answer that question, we look at housing as being generalist in nature. That is, every other segment of housing has one person or the other that is responsible for that segment. And when you have these plethora of people responsible for each segment of housing, that means for everybody now to collate their idea into one idea will be demanding. Housing too is not clearly distinguished from related activities. Architecture, for example, the end product is a structure. It could be housing, it could be maybe business entity, maybe complex. When you look at this, you need to go further now to look at housing in terms of this being generally, to now look at it as a service that have multifaceted activity and it is complex. Within this complexity, we now have this lack of uniformity. And when you look at housing not being differentiated from other disciplines, that means it lacks clear definition. And then the teaching that gives back to housing is being taken from plethora of teaching elements in terms of the built environment. If one will narrow ourselves to that. If one will narrow ourselves to the built environment, to have estate management, to have building, to have urban regional planning, to have architecture, everybody coming together to produce a unit. And when you have those elements coming together to produce a unit, for us to have a clear-cut definition for what they're going to produce is demanding. And because of this lack of clear stated requirements, is also a major issue militating against housing. That is, what is the requirement for me to go into the profession of saying my focus in housing? It is seen as a unit of nearly every unit or every person. There's nothing that you want to do now that housing is not strategic to it. And when you have all this, the implication is we are still seen, but we are not being heard. That is, you see the end product, which is housing. But the process of making that product available is not so obvious. And that means there will be a disconnect in the expectation and how those expectations is going to be achieved. So, major concern now, for us to see housing, for us to distill housing as a profession from other units, we need to ask ourselves a whole lot of questions. And some of the major questions that we need to ask ourselves, and I know you as a person too, you have a whole lot of questions that is that you've been trying to find answer to. But for us, we have this 8 listed question or concern that we need to address. The first one is, how can housing become a profession? The second one, what will be the difference between housing and other allied professions? Can it evolve on its own, or do we need other professions to midwife it? That is, are we saying maybe, for example, we're taking over regional planning as a platform for housing? Can they midwife it? If they're going to midwife it, what direction will we have? Would they be able to differentiate it from the core urban regional planning? Because within the urban regional planning research, housing is central. Again, too, Who will develop the curriculum? What will be the training requirements and duration? Which body will regulate this profession? What will be the content of the professional code and ethics for his conduct? Will there be subtle resistance or attempts at frustrating the move from assistant profession? We know for any professional to emerge, it has to come from some established profession. And if housing paraventure wants to come from urban and regional planning now, would the urban and regional planning see it as a threat? Or would they see it as something that they want to embrace? And if they are embracing it, because there is level to embrace it, will it be at the level of inclusive, or you are embracing it at the level of exclusive, or you are embracing it at the level of you waiting for it to die? We need to answer all these questions pointedly for us to emerge from where housing is today in taking it out to housing as a discipline or as a profession to where we want it to be in the nearest future. Housing as a profession, professionalization. Why is housing special? This question, every other person have an answer to it, and at the end of the day, nobody have an answer to it. When you look at it critically, why is housing special? We cannot provide answer to that. But in nationalizing that answer, in making that answer that we've given, or the provision of the house that we've given, to have a voice, to be operationalized, we need a whole lot of discipline that will be involved. But for us to distill housing from all these professions, we need to see how we can make housing itself what we want it to be. So why is housing special? A whole lot of questions is also being asked. Housing has its heterogeneity of its components. That is, for each element, starting from land. Land is strategic to housing. Is the land available? If it is available, in what way is it available? We have housing too being immobile. And within this immobility, maybe we will be talking about for academy, but I will ask you pointed question. Who in this class wants to spend the rest of his life in a academy? I believe the answer is best imagined. Everybody, I know the answer is best imagined. Durability. If housing is well maintained, it can stand through time. There are buildings that have been built years back, thousands of years back, they are still in existence. Again, too, for us to build, we need serious capital. Is this serious capital, are they available? Again, housing is a basic necessity. Everybody, if you treat yourself, everybody wants to have a piece of the pie. But within this basic necessity that we have, the supply is limited. Housing too has racial and ethnic consideration. Again, this cultural dimension to housing is also a major impediment to how housing is going to be seen as a profession, or housing is going to be seen as an allied discipline within a non-discipline. And again, for us to move from one building to other, involve high costs. So when we take all this into consideration, we realize, or the answer that we have is, housing is a unique commodity. And within this uniqueness of it as a commodity, how do we now make this unique commodity has a voice, has a value, has a way of easy access, or in terms of looking at the demand and supply aspect of it, how do we make this demand and supply aspects available? What is a profession? Because we've been trying to build a foundation for us to see housing as a profession within the built environment, or within any environment that you want to put it. What we're interested in is, let us see this process as a profession, where it will going to be, we'll determine that. Until, or before we determine that, we need to see it first as a profession. The Australian Council of Profession 2000 defined a profession as a disciplined group of individuals who adhere to ethical standards. That is, they have their model of operandi. They have what directs the activity therein. They have rule and regulation govern the establishment, and hold themselves out as anchor and are accepted by the public as possessing special knowledge and skill in a wide area of body of learning derived from research, education, and training at a high level, and who are prepared to apply this knowledge and exercise their skill in the interest of others. When you look at this definition, even for the profession, you need to ask yourself, housing as a unit of study, does it have those requirements? And I know the answer is no, without missing words. Housing as an entity is struggled in many disciplines. When you talk about government, housing is central. When you talk about economics, housing is central. When you talk about urban and regional planning, housing is central. When you talk about estate management, housing is central. So in all facets of human endeavor, housing is central. But within this centrality, again, there is nobody saddled with the responsibility of monitoring the ethical standard that will determine how housing will be, or the kind of training that you will get to be a professional as a professional in the built environment. Again, we want to look at attributes. We add the general definition. We want to look at attributes of what makes a product or an entity a professional. The first one is great responsibility and ethical constraint. For housing to be a discipline or a profession, there is need for him to have great responsibility. The great responsibility is accrued to it by our demand for it, but the process of achieving that great responsibility is not there. Again, ethical constraint. Who govern how housing is being produced? Who govern how housing is being managed? Who govern the nitty-gritty involved in housing? Accountability is another attribute that we need to look at. How accountable are we to the process? It has to be based on specialized training and skill in terms of theoretical knowledge. People say we have borrowed plethora and knowledge of characteristics of theory of conceptual framework to deal with housing. But do we have one that will satisfy the requirement for housing? Again, another attribute that we need to look at. Institutional preparation. Do we have it? Again, for the government sector, housing is always, maybe using Nigeria as an example, where I'm used to. Housing is always struggled within one ministry or agency across board. And for the South African one ahead, maybe housing will be within the general provision for human settlement, which is to all intent and purpose may not give the required voice for it to be seen, or the attribute, the expectation that housing is required may not necessarily be given if there is no clear-cut demarcation for us to make housing as a central piece in our discussion. Autonomy is expected, but again, we have autonomy for housing, and again, within the profession, you don't have customer, what you have are clients, and then you have direct working relationship. But in housing provision for what we have now, the end product is to have a customer that is willing to buy. But for housing to be as a profession, those that are saddled with responsibility of making that professional ethic sustainable and applicable should be looking at the production, what they are doing in terms of meeting the requirement for the client, not for meeting the requirement for the customer, because the two are different. And then you have direct working relationship as an attribute of housing. That means within the built environment, every other person that has something to do within the housing sector has to have a direct linkage with those that saddle with responsibility for providing housing. So we move on. What is professionalization? Professionalization has been defined by a number of authors, but we will limit ourselves to these ones that are here. Hoyle defined professionalization as a process whereby occupations are become or seek to become publicly recognized as profession according to the degree to which they meet the alleged criteria. Again, professionalization involves the development of skill, identity, norms, and values associated with becoming part of a professional group. And professionalism can be seen as having two strands. One strand is concerned with improvement of status, and the other is saddled with involvement of capacity or improvement of capacity of member to enhance the quality of service which to provide. And for all professions, I think they meet these requirements. But for housing as a profession, or the one we are agitating for housing to be a profession, do we meet all these requirements? Then what do we do, or what can we do to make this profession, the requirement that we stated, to be part of parcel of what is driving housing as an endpoint, rather than what the process will be in terms of seeing housing as an element within a plethora of activity. Distinguished attributes of profession. That is, we want to ask ourselves, can housing be a profession? For it to be a profession, he has to satisfy these attributes. He has to have his own body of knowledge in terms of theory, in terms of concepts that is driving it. He has to have his own authority, that is regulatory body that is responsible for the day-to-day running of those that allude to that discipline. He has to have opportunity to be sanctioned by the community. He has to have his own culture, his own norms, his own value, his own way of doing things. He has to have ethical code, what the breadth, the entry and exit strategy. What are the necessary requirements for you to be seeking as being qualified to work in this direction? And these attributes, the way we satisfy them, will determine to a larger extent if our postulation as housing as a profession will be achieved or not. In now looking at it, from those elements that we've listed, we want to look at where we are now, the expectation, and where we want to be. For systemic theory, I think, like I've said, there are existing body of knowledge that you can borrow from, that you can use to satisfy the requirement as housing as a profession, or the theory that you can use in teaching the element that the housing will require as a discipline. And for every system, for every discipline, majority of them to borrowed theory, borrowed concept, borrowed idea from allied profession. For example, the regional planning that I'm used to, we have theory in, we have theory for. This gives us that this is the theory that I input, and these are the theory that we borrow from other allied disciplines for us to run the process. So today, the position that we have is we can borrow theory. That means we have a starting point, and to a larger extent, said theory informed practice. That means we have a solid footing that we are standing on. The position. Expected position now, it can still be developed, it can still be improved upon. What to do? Housing related theory should be internally developed for more relevant. The authority we don't have. For us to make it happen, we need it. I think it is needed for us to see housing as a profession. So this is an opportunity for us now, maybe a guidation, for us to be looking at this element and see where can we be significant, or how can we be relevant, or how can we contribute to this discussion as we are moving it forward. What do we need to do in terms of authority? This will come from the unique body of knowledge acquired. That is, the authority, we know how, take for example, the architecture, we know how they run their things. For engineers, we know how they run their things. So we have people that we can mirror from. We have professional body that we can mirror from and use their own platform too to run the process. Community sanction, we don't have. It is needed. People should know of and recognize the existence and the authority of the profession. Ethical code, as that today we don't have, it is required. This should be formulated by the regulating body. Culture, as of today we don't have, it is expected. This should evolve from regular meeting and then service service approach of housing as a profession. So these are things that we should be thinking about. And again, too, is uniqueness. In the uniqueness of housing, as a body of knowledge, we have bits and pieces of it, like I've said. When you talk about housing, urban and regional planning has an element within it that is focused on housing. When you talk about housing, estates, value and rare, as housing as a major focus on making the housing system available for people in the market. It is in existence. Expected position, it is needed. Training curriculum to be developed for the undergraduate and postgraduate and professional examination. So within this, we are agitating or we are proposing that as this discussion is going forward, those that have interest within the housing sector should be coming together to form a unique body for themselves and try to drive this process to where we'll be seeing us not having our own knowledge and body in bits and pieces elsewhere, but domicile within our own environment. Standard entry one, it is needed to be stipulated by the regulating body. Standard, service orientation, we don't have it, we need it. Service standard to be developed and circulated by the regulating body. So, as it is now, we have so much responsibility on everybody sitting here and those that are hearing us wherever they are, to be thinking on how we want to reposition housing from being it in pieces and pieces in elsewhere, for it to be seen as a profession that has its own calling, that has its own direction, that's been governed by the ethic of the profession, for us to get the requirements or the expected, for us to meet the expected housing shortage across the world. So in this, we've already positioned housing. Then we want to look at human settlement, which is where housing is going to start. Because we're talking about human settlement, the centrality of human settlement is availability of housing, or the type of housing that they're in. The United Nations General Assembly in 1999 discussed the components of human settlement development in relation to sustainability. And when we look at sustainability, we talk about sustainability in terms of the environment, in terms of the social element, in terms of the economy element. But for housing, we want to distill it from general idea of those three components, those three pillars of sustainable development, in looking at how do we reposition our own development within that context in achieving sustainability. And in doing that, key element is four. The first one is how do we create zero energy related to personal or building space. Quality of life, how do we enhance it? Because the whole essence of you being human as a human being is for you to have quality of life. And in the process of that, enhance your own livability of your environment. Again, how do we make situations sustainable? Because whatever development that we've done now, and those developments cannot withstand shocks or perturbation that will come from our fauna. Hello?
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 We have constraints on time. As you remember that
Okay.
at 12 o'clock we have a load shedding in the area.
Okay, I will try to round up now.
Okay,
I
can
think
you
I've did
really round up?
Okay,
I'll give you 1 minute to round up.
Okay, I think I've laid the foundation.
Okay.
And try to look at the connection between housing and human settlement. And then here we want to look at the major risks that threaten sustainable development in terms of housing as a profession, as a response to it. We look at fragmentation of urbanization. We look at forced migration. We look at slum. We look at city and climate change. We look at rising insecurity and urban risk. And then we tend to look at what can we do in providing adequate housing. And I think the slide is being used that all those issues have been discussed. And in conclusion, housing as an inescapable physical manifestation. Building of houses, dwelling, shelter, accommodation, sites and services of residential elements is within the purview of what the profession in housing should do. And because we cannot deviate or dissociate housing from the built environment, we need to look at a body of people that are knowledgeable within the context of what housing should be and how housing should be provided to be the one saddled with the responsibility of making it happen. Housing can be a profession if concerted efforts are made at continuously defining the curriculum for undergraduate and postgraduate level. This requires awareness, urgency, and doggedness. And within this, we have to make ourselves invisible. We have to make ourselves being true to whatever we do. And we have to make ourselves being able to lobby the government agency for us to have a profession that we call housing. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you so much. It's very difficult to control someone online. We're supposed to be out here at past. We are now 9 minutes late from that time. We are now going for lunch. I think, Prof, the inputs will be consolidated, even this one. I know that we will rush. It's a long paper that has been developed, which is very critical for the process that we are engaging on to professionalize the human settlement. And therefore, I think we will take the discussions forward as part of finalizing the conference discussions. That paper will be part of that. But for now, I also want to take the opportunity to thank everyone in the room for being a very cooperative audience for the session. Presenting a hybrid conference is not easy because you line up somebody to come in at a specific period and then that person is not available. You have to change meeting and take somebody else. So I really appreciate your cooperation. We are now going for lunch. After lunch, you will have another driver taking you forward in the process. The lunch is supposed to be 45 minutes. We are now at 22. For us to be back here, it will be quarter past.
One of the academics attached to the Department of Human Settlement at the University of Fort Hare. Today, my task is quite simple, is to facilitate the academic discussion for our conference. Like the title indicates, we are just about to embark on an academic journey, which will be led by some of renowned academics and scholars in our discipline. But before we do that, perhaps important to indicate that first part of our session will be given to Mrs. Lini. Pardon me if I don't pronounce the surname correctly. She's here to give us a message of support from the U.S. Consul General to South Africa. I'm told she's already on our Microsoft platforms, ready to share with us what she has prepared for this session. Following that, it will be presentations by three of our most renowned scholars by the name of Professor Duroc and Prof. Nzameya, who is from the university. Prof. Duroc is from IHSP-SA Free State University, and then they will be joined by Professor Mutimisha, who is from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So those are our 3 scholars who will be leading the panel of academics for this session titled Academic Discussion. And then when they are done with their presentation, we'll then have 2 of our graduates who will be responding to their presentation. They will engage with their presentation. Remember, any academic debate always triggers and provoke academic questions and academic comments. So we'll be giving our 2 students platform to pose any question or any comment they might have based on what our panelists will have shared with us. And then once the 2 graduates are done, I'll then open the floor to everyone to make their inputs in terms of either questions or comments. So the floor will be, open to everybody who is in this room, including those who are connecting and linking with us visually. So in a nutshell, that's how this session is going to unfold going forward. So without much ado, let's call upon Mrs. Lina to share with us the little that she has prepared for us while we give her the audience. Ms. Lin, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Thank you so much. Welcome. The platform is yours.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so pleased to be joining you, albeit virtually from Durban, where I'm the U.S. Consul General at our consulate here in Durban. On behalf of the entire mission of the United States to South Africa, that's our embassy in Pretoria and our 3 consulates in Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town, I'm so excited to be here today. I'm not sure if Liz shared this info with the planners, but I actually was an urban studies major in undergraduate, and my undergraduate university focus was on housing segregation in the United States and how this research was done 30 years ago, how to gain access to safe, equitable housing in historically disadvantaged areas in the United States. So this is a topic that I've been passionate about for many, many years. I won't give away my age on when I graduated from university. So first off, I want to commend everyone in the conference for the hard work and the research that you're doing into this space. This is an area where it's incredibly difficult, and for so long I think we focused almost exclusively on the physical structures for housing throughout the world and getting people into physical housing, without thinking about all of the things that go with it, including safe housing, sustainable housing, the municipal support that goes along with it, and what this housing means for access to employment, education, and healthcare. These are areas where in South Africa, the research that you all are doing is so critical, and it's a topic that my team and I at the consulate talk about constantly. We spend a lot of time on the road within KZN, traveling not just throughout Durban, but also throughout the entire province. And it's amazing to see the developments, but also to see the disparity and the challenges based on where housing has been built and access to these services. One of the reasons I'm excited to be talking to you today is I'm always excited when there's opportunities for international partnerships and recognizing that there's a strong engagement between several U.S. educational institutions and their South African partners is something that I am really incredibly proud of. And it's one of the things that has been a hallmark of U.S.-South African relations for many, many years. And in particular, oftentimes the ideas planted that come up in this academic discourse that the MC was referring to, plant the seeds in other areas. I mean, it very much is the analogy of the seeds flying throughout the air and planting ideas in new areas. And so I commend you all for the hard work that you're doing in this area. And I understand that there's a large symposium that's hopefully going to be hosted in person in Durban in July 2022. And I hope that many of you will be there and that I will have the opportunity to meet you face to face and learn more about the research that you're doing. So with that, I'll pass it back to the MC, but thank you very much and good luck with the conference.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Lin, for a wonderful message of support to our conference, but also to our discipline of human settlement. Thank you very much. Colleagues, without much ado, I'm not sure whether our professors are already on the platform, Microsoft platform. Any signal? Professor Turok, Professor Uzambia, and Professor Mukitimisha. Those are three colleagues who are supposed to be already on the Microsoft Teams. Colleagues, I think when we try to sort that technical glitch, perhaps important to make a few remarks. One of the things that I have observed since I came to this conference is the difficulty that faces us as human settlement. We have a serious challenge. We have serious issues that we are confronted with. And the only possible way out of this, or only possible solution, in my view, will be how that's part of problem that I was talking about. Yeah, and how do we emerge out of all this? I think it's important that we really need to look at the kind of research that we conduct as human settlement scholars and academics, because it's only through research that as a country, as a nation, will be able to overcome most, if not all, of our problems, especially social ills such as poverty that continues to affect majority of our people, issues of gender-based violence, issues of unemployment, and many other types of crime. That because all of these do not happen in vacuum. They happen right within our communities. They happen right within our human settlement. And it's important that we also prioritize stability within our communities. Because I'm one person who strongly believes that if we are to overcome all these social ills that I've just mentioned now, starting point should be for us to sort out our human settlement. And how do you sort out our human settlement? One way of doing that would be to bring stability in our human settlement, because I believe is stable human settlement leads to peaceful, stable communities. So we need to prioritize stability within our sector, within our discipline as human settlement, but also sector from practitioners' perspective. So those are some of the takeaway that one is able to make out of this conference. Having listened to the very first speaker when we started earlier today, I think everything points to one direction. Difficult but possible. There are issues, but it's possible. So it's no longer about thinking about issues, it's about thinking about possible solutions. How do you go about formulating appropriate responses to these issues? Otherwise, we'll sit here and talk about problems, talk about issues, till we are blue in our faces. So we need to leave this room having formulated appropriate responses, because professionals will have to have their own way of responding to these issues. Academics themselves will have to have, I mean, is it okay now? Perfect, perfect. I was just trying to keep audience. So colleagues, I'm told our guests are now on their platform. And if that's the case, then we expect Professor Turok to be on board. We expect Professor Uzameya to be on board, and Professor Mukidimisha to be on board. I'm not sure who's going to be the first. Who's going to go?
Turok.
Okay, okay. I think in terms of our order here, we'll call upon Professor Turok, whom I said is attached to IHSP-SA of Free State, where he serves as NRF chair. Prof. Turok, if you are able to hear me, the floor is all yours, Prof. Sorry, colleagues, for that. I'm told there is a bit of technical glitch with regard to Prof. Turok, so we'll go to Prof. Mari Uzameya, who is already on the platform. Maybe she'll be followed by Prof. Turok as soon as we sort out the technical glitch. Prof. Mary, over to you.
Yes. Hello, are you able to see me and hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, thanks very much. Okay, well, thanks very much for the invitation. Thanks, Prof. Mbanga, for an excellent conference. I was able to listen to quite a few of the sessions this morning, and that was fascinating. I think this is really an interesting time. I think we've got a great leadership with our new minister. Those words were really great as well. That were great words. So this panel is about some provocations, and I understand we'll have students responding. So I'll go right ahead, or protocol observed. So in relation to the human and settlements program, we're looking at capacity challenges. I think that's the theme throughout the conference, and I'm going to look particularly at the informal settlement upgrading program and the capacity challenges related to its implementation. And these, as we, I think, are all aware, have been very much in the room since 2004 when the program first came into the then housing code, with very slow implementation throughout actually to date. What I'd like to say, so the provocations I'll make are in this realm of what we call praxis, which is the relationship between theory and practice. And it's already been mentioned by people in the morning session how important the connection between theory and practice is in the capacity to implement complex housing programs. And within that, the question of reflexive practitioners and what does that mean? And the provocation I'll make is that there has to be facilitation capabilities and navigation capabilities as well as inquisitiveness in order to implement the informal settlement upgrading program. I'm going to use the Slovo Park informal settlement as a quick case, and just to paint the picture of how complex such implementation can be. So this is a settlement south of El Dorado Park in Soweto, and it's existed since the early 1990s. There's been various government attempts to improve the settlement, And these have all either ended at political promise or they have progressed to appointment of consultant teams, but never have progressed beyond layout planning. So several aborted layout planning processes took place, and in between this, the city passed a resolution and council to relocate the settlement entirely. And collectively, the inhabitants resisted this, and as a last resort, they went to the court and took the city to court. And the court was very clear in its judgment in April 2016. It confirmed that the upgrading of informal settlements program is the applicable program, and it ordered the city to apply for funding under the UISP, the upgrading of informal settlements program, to the province. Now, 5 years later, the UISP implementation has still not proceeded to an agreed layout plan either. Let alone any other implementation other than interim services. So substantial budgets have been spent on further consultant teams, a task team involving settlement leadership, academic and NGO support to this leadership, and I had the privilege of being part of that. The city and the settlement's legal representatives and municipal officials. So this task team has been sitting for 5 years. And the deliberations, and I need to acknowledge my colleague Neil Klug, him and I have been sharing this role. The deliberations have served throughout as a support to the community development forum, but the actual task team has provided a window on the challenges that officials face in implementing the UISP. So it was very interesting watching a government official who'd been tasked with this upgrading program, housing department official from the municipality, trying to move this along for 5 years. So briefly setting out some of the main challenges, I'll make the argument that one of the most important skills is the ability to navigate complex challenges and changing terrain, in fact, and the need to have inquisitiveness and not to give up. Because the UISP implementation is a constantly moving target. So the Slovo Park informal settlement presented diverse and changing challenges. Its inhabitants are not simply a list of beneficiaries. They have varying capacity themselves, individually and collectively, to transform the settlement. And they have various levels of commitment to the informal settlement. Their lives go on. Some move out and others move into the settlement. Also, their livelihoods mean that they have varying levels of interest vested in the settlement. For instance, there's a constantly changing rental market. The material and physical context varies and changes. Different levels of individual and collective investment, from precarious cardboard shacks all the way to brick and mortar structures. The level of integrity of community organization and representation may vary and fluctuate, may be very dependent on individuals, as will the approaches that communities decide to take in terms of engaging the municipality at different points in time. And when frustrations build up, they might resort to protests, they might resort again to threats, to go to court again, and so on. All of this is very difficult for officials to navigate. And then there are questions about inherent suitability for permanent development of the actual land, and there are often challenges to initial findings of unsuitability, and in the case of Slovo Park, this was challenged and indeed later found through new geotechnical investigations that upgrading is feasible. So even that ground was changing. Then there are separate challenges that lie within municipalities. Staff turnover, loss of institutional memory, no records found of previous decisions made, or tensions arise when one official seeks to champion upgrading, and others might present that systems within municipalities are geared towards conventional housing delivery and stacked against the upgrading. And procurement systems and rules are often exclude the skill set that needs to be procured for successful in-situ upgrading. Linked to this is inappropriate skills among consultants and procurement often based biased towards large engineering companies which operate in rigid ways when upgrading is best facilitated actually by small, specialized, agile teams that are often non-profit. Interdepartmental frictions arise. There's often non-alignment between different departments, and in-situ upgrading inevitably can't be handled only by one department. Infrastructure, planning, and a variety of social development all have a role to play and need to be coordinated. In Slovo Park, for instance, the planning department seemed bent on a conventional layout plan that would have led to the demolition of the entire settlement, whereas the UISP, in fact, exempts layouts from norms and standards and allows them to divert from standard planning norms. And then there are, of course, there's policy challenges, and this is often where national level policies might not be fully aligned, or where there are different grants that are brought together for the implementation, and each grant might have different requirements, and even more so when this is blended with municipal funding, which comes with its own priorities. And then, of course, there are political challenges, and the current electioneering process, and that was also already mentioned this morning, is, of course, adding challenges to that. There's shifting priorities determined by politics rather than by policy, and a change in Slovo Park. We had this case, change in political leadership several times over the 5 years, taking us 10 steps back. Political interference, often linked to corrupt practices, and loyalties that are rewarded. So that is another thing that a housing official has to navigate in order to get this implementation done. So really, what skills do human settlements and planning professionals need in order to navigate difficult programs and contexts to improve informal settlements and to get them on a trajectory for permanent upgrading? They need to understand applicable policy and keep abreast of policy changes, but that in itself is no passport to a smooth implementation process. And so what I'd like to say is that we need these reflexive professionals that are capable of critical practice and are capable to link that back in a constant live loop to theory, and to allow both to shape them. So the word reflexive in that sense means not only a constant reflection as to what one means for the other, and in this case what the theory means for the context, but a reflexive process would be one in which the individual itself, him and herself, is shaped by this process. And this means the capacity is shaped, and the learning happens. And this goes back to the point that was made this morning about mentorship. Once you enter the workplace, and you might really have to resist the mentorship a rigid official is giving you, when in fact this is the kind of mentorship that comes out of this reflexive process that you have to allow yourself to undergo. But what is theory and what is critical practice? Those are questions that I'd love the students to discuss a little later. So very quickly, critical practice is one that is driven by progressive orientation, one that is serious about transforming in a meaningful way, not for the sake of implementation and ticking boxes and reporting back, but for the sake of changing material conditions. So there must be a deeper drive. And this requires listening, reflecting, considering, collaborating, asking questions, remaining determined not to give up. Theory may simply be applicable policy and its framing. In the case of the UISP, the Upgrading of Informal Settlements program, this is a transformative framing. It aligns with Skluan's framing around spatial justice. Do we understand what this really means? And where do we look for guidance for this? So my provocation to students is, who are the theorists that help us grapple with these framings and give meaning to them? And how do we remain in touch with them once we're out there in our jobs as so-called professionals? And I just wanted to acknowledge that there really is a champion in the municipality, in the City of Durban municipality, that has allowed that, and my exposure to that champion has allowed me to come up with this list. It's the kind of window that an academic would normally get of actual policy implementation. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Isabella, for that thought-provoking presentation. I can see people are making a lot of notes, which means we'll have quite interesting debate following all your presentations. Thank you so much, Prof. We now go straight to Prof. Turok if he's ready. Prof, your 10 minutes start right here. Prof. Turok, over to you.
Thanks very much. Can I just check that you can hear me?
Yes, Prof, you can hear you loud and clear.
Right, that's great. Apologies for doing this on my phone. I've had terrible internet problems this afternoon. So I had prepared a slide PowerPoint presentation, but I won't be able to use it because I'm not that sophisticated in transferring it from my laptop to my phone. What I want to talk about is very complementary to what Marie has just talked about in relation to informal settlements, and that's a fortunate coincidence. I want to talk about backyard housing, because backyard housing has overtaken informal settlements as the fastest growing form of housing in South Africa now, particularly in the cities, of course. So backyard housing, and I had some pictures to show you this and some facts and figures to back this up, but I won't be able to do that now. But backyard housing ranges in form from shacks, which is the dominant type. Shacks in the backyard of often of RDP or BNG housing, but also in the backyard of older townships, the older the matchbox houses of apartheid townships. And this is proliferating for a range of reasons, including the demand, the sheer demand for affordable rental accommodation in the cities, from the growing populations and from people moving from the countryside in search of opportunities in the cities. It's also growing because it provides an income to the homeowners through the rent that the tenants pay. And indeed, what's beginning to happen is that more formal structures are being constructed, small-scale rental units, in a nutshell, in many townships, made of bricks and mortar or solid concrete blocks, much better quality accommodation with internal ablutions and generally much more satisfactory types of housing. So I was going to contrast the sort of the low road, which is, the low road consists of essentially shacks without extra infrastructure put in place, leading to intense crowding of these areas with massive backyarding. Contrast that with a kind of high road of backyarding, which involves much better quality construction, increases in the infrastructure of the area, the bulk infrastructure, but also the on-site connections, secondary connections to the backyard units themselves, for sewage, for water, for electricity, and more refuse collection. Okay, so a better quality environment that comes through the kind of regularization of backyard housing. Basically we have these two different trajectories of the low road, which is a problematic trajectory because it does lead to sewage flowing out, sewage systems, it leads to water systems can't cope, electricity overloads, and other problems of a lack of capacity to absorb these growing populations, as against the high road, which is basically a much more favorable scenario. And I want to argue that, and I have written about this, how important it is for government to support this process of regularization and formalization of backyard housing, to make it sustainable, to create decent, livable communities rather than putting it crudely slums, and to create much better environments for people to live in. And that requires, and this is the reason for this capacity building thing, because it requires a different mindset on the part of planners and other municipal officials. The conventional mindset in relation to backyard housing is a kind of compliance approach. This is informal, it doesn't conform with the planning rules, it doesn't conform with building plan regulations, it doesn't conform with zoning, and therefore we need to enforce the existing rules, and at the very best we need to kind of neglect what's going on, right? At worst, it's about enforcement and requiring these structures to be demolished because they don't comply. We need to convert that narrow compliance mindset into a more positive mindset of supporting this phenomenon in order to move from the low to the high road, to upgrade the structures, to enhance the infrastructure, to begin to allow developers
Prof. Turo? Hello, Prof. Turo?
Hello?
Hello, Prof. We are losing you this side. We lost you for a while. I'm not sure whether it's because of connectivity or...
It must be. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we're now able to hear you.
Right.
Just take a few steps
what
back.
I'm arguing is take a few steps back.
Yes.
That we need capacity building of municipal officials in order to enable this upgrading process of backyard shacks into proper rental units. And that requires shifting from a negative compliance approach where you throw the rule book at these homeowners and developers to facilitating, supporting them to meet the rules and regulations in a sort of gradual way. So it requires moving from a reactive approach to a more proactive approach, to support, to understand where people are coming from, and to engage with that whole process in a much more constructive way than in a sort of a bureaucratic way. That's the key message I'm trying to put across. And that requires several things. Firstly, it requires interpreting the rules and regulations as flexibly as possible. There is often a lot of discretion in bylaws, in building regulations, in planning rules. There's often a lot of discretion for frontline officials. It's vitally important they use that discretion to support this process rather than to adopt too narrow a view. That's the first one, interpretation. The second one is a hand-holding or a guidance. It's about helping people to meet the rules and regulations, right? Rather than just to say, no, my job is to say yes or no. Actually helping people with the process by simplifying procedures, by simplifying the templates that people need to fill in to comply, and by generally supporting them through that process of getting building permission, getting planning permission, getting title deeds to their properties, and so on. And the third aspect of capacity building is about enabling these developers and homeowners to access external support, to get finance, to enable them to fund these structures, to get connections from the infrastructure departments, a secondary connection to the water, to the sewage, to the electricity network. So it's about helping planners within municipalities connecting with other departments in the municipality and working together rather than working in their own particular silos. So to sum up, I'm advocating that capacity building is about being flexible, being adaptive, showing empathy and understanding to what's happening on the ground in our communities, so that our officials are not bureaucrats, are not administering rules and regulations in a kind of unsympathetic way, but are applying them poor communities to invest through service charges. There's a win-win here from moving from the low road of informality and density and overcrowding to the higher road of more functional settlements with better quality housing. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Chiro. I'm not sure, colleagues, whether Prof. Mukidimacha has actually managed to join us. I'm told she's going through load shedding in Devon. Any signal? Is she on now? Okay, I think the indication is she's able to join us. Prof, can you hear me? If you are able to hear me, the platform is all yours, Prof.
Okay, thank you very much. I can hear you. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Can you all hear me?
Yes. Yes. Can hear you?
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to start off by actually thanking the organizer of this event. I mean, it takes quite a lot of energy to put something together, and I'm very grateful to be here. What I want to talk about, I'm given 7 minutes to give some reflections around capacity building, and what I want to talk about is very linked to what Prof. Mari and of course Prof. Turok has touched on their area discussions or reflections. I just wanted to make some reflection around how do we make decisions in terms of the land and in terms of the housing. So I want us to start reflecting on housing as a system rather than as a structure, because when we talk about the house and the final product, which is a building, is the final product, but there's a lot of steps which are involved towards getting to that final structure. And if we are talking about capacity building, therefore, we need to talk about capacity building holistically from different perspectives. So I wanted to share just one slide where I'm just talking through the process of, let me see if I can quickly share my slide. Are you seeing my slide there? No. Just one slide. I'm trying, I don't know if it's showing. Are you able to see my slide?
No.
Not yet.
Okay, that's fine. I'll just talk from my side if you are not able to see this. But I wanted to share a slide to just take you through the process of how do we then get...
We are not able to see. I mean, it's projecting.
Oh, it's projecting. Thank you very much. So what I would say is that when we talk about capacity building in the housing fraternity, we need to understand it from a holistic perspective. And I think Prof. Turok has already started to talk about this towards the end of his presentation. But what I'm going to say is that you will have to understand that getting land, it takes a lot of time. One, we don't have that we're talking about, because most of the land which are strategically located are actually either owned by private sectors or belonging to someone else, not to the government. So government has to acquire that piece of land. But also over and above that is that the land that is available, which most people use, especially people in the low-income brackets, is the land which we consider it to be off-market. Actually, it has been written off, and people that use whatever they're taking and they leave that land. Then they occupy that space. Now, for us to be able to get land and then have the houses we're talking about, then we need to start talking about the process in which it takes to get that. So it's very easy to sit here and say we are not delivering houses at the pace it requires. But if we understand it as a system, therefore we understand why we are delaying, because once something breaks into the system, then there won't be any movement. So very often when we talk about land and poor and slow pace in terms of the delivery of houses, we basically focus on the final structure of the building itself, but not on the process. Because you will understand that for you to be able to come up with the land, the first thing you need to do, you have to do the feasibility study, of course. And that takes time and effort. Do we have the capacity? And this is what I want the students to start reflecting on, that when we are requiring land, do we have the capacity at that level where we are actually saying we can do the feasibility? Do we have people who are able to do that? And if we do, then that's another way we need to deal with the issue of capacity. And of course, this issue, after that you get the land, you have to also make sure that there's a council adoption of the land and you're able to function that. Of course, that also takes its own time in terms of people agreeing and discussion and when the meeting is supposed to take place. Then, of course, we also talk about the issue around the agreement sale. So if this is the land we are going to buy, then the owner of that particular piece of land needs to agree on the pricing. And that also is another process which takes time. Negotiation skills at that particular point in time. And this is where actually we are heading from, because most of the time you find that the private sector, they put their own price set for their own piece of land. And we also put our own price, which we think maybe the particular piece of land is supposed to go for. So then there's a need to negotiate. Do we have actually graduates who are equipped or people who are equipped to assist us in this process, to negotiate for the right value, for the right amount of sale of that particular piece of land? So that's another area where we need to talk about capacity building. Then the other area, of course, after you've done that, then there are a number of more skilled base which we need to deal with. My slide here, because of the load shedding, it's disappearing. I'm just using my other computer. Now, we also have then to start dealing with the issue around the layout. This is more planning stuff, layout and subdivision of that particular piece of land, which will also take another period of time. On average, it takes 2 months, sometimes it can take more. Then do we have actually graduates who are able to do that? Do we have the municipality which is ready to do that quick enough? The systems. I know the situation with some of the colleagues that submitted their special consent to the municipalities at the beginning of the year. Because of COVID, they have not got the results, and that delays in terms of the responding to the issues and the question in terms of the housing. Now, those are other areas we need to look at. Of course, then we talk about the registering that piece of land. Of course, you want to register before you do the layout of subdivision. So those are some of the areas that I want us to start reflecting on, to say, at what level do we pitch this capacity we're talking about? Is it across? Where are we getting wrong? Also, the issue around the tendering process in terms of who's actually going to build this is also another process of its own, which needs attention. Now, also, just towards my conclusion, just to wrap this discussion, to say we also have to able to differentiate when do we draw the line to say this is a capacity issue and this is a pure laziness issue, so where people that are just not doing their work. Where do we draw the line between the people not doing their work, but also where do we draw the line in terms of people who are generally corrupt and who are not able to do what they're supposed to do when they're given tender, they're given money to come up with high quality houses, but they bring something which is not acceptable or up to the standard. So I think what I'm there for requesting or urging students to start reflecting on is the issues around at what level do we pitch the capacity we're talking about to be able to deliver these houses. And I will end here for now. I hope my 7 minutes is over now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Mukitisha. A very wonderful, thought-provoking presentation. I think it also was just to complement what The two previous speakers have already shared with us, who are Professor Durok and Professor Uzambeya. So, colleagues, here we are now. I know Mr. Boy's instruction is I just have to facilitate, but as an academic, I'm quite provoked. Sitting there, listening to the speakers, I keep on becoming agitated, by the issues that they are raising here. Because before I even give to our two graduates, as I was listening to them, two or three things come to mind. The first one is the three speakers have actually demonstrated to us the extent to which housing shortage among the urban poor remains a problem in South Africa, and how it manifests itself. There are two ways in which this manifests itself based on today's presentation. First one is it manifests itself through informal settlement. It also manifests itself through what we call backyard dwelling. And all this then lead us to the next question that came to my mind, to say, what do we then do in our response? Remember what I said earlier when I said, it's not about issues, it's about how do we respond. We have already identified issues. We have made our diagnosis as human settlement practitioners and scholars. But what we are still struggling with is to formulate appropriate responses. And having listened to the three speakers, what I'm hearing is issues around capacity. And I think they actually explained so well that to me, for the first time, it dawned in my mind that we have issues of capacity at different levels. If you listen to Prof. Uzambeya, he's talking about capacity in terms of skills and the know-how, in terms of both the beneficiaries but also the government side. Do we have enough capacity in terms of the know-how? And then Prof. Duro took it further to say, yes, this capacity is a serious problem, because he spoke at it from service infrastructure point of view, to say the existing infrastructure, does it have enough capacity to accommodate this additional demand that comes with backyard dwelling? With Prof. Misha taking it to another level, to say, yes, it's not only about infrastructure service, also the know-how, but also in terms of the natural resources, the land as a natural, resource. Because you can't do anything unless you have land, especially in more strategic areas in relation to our urban areas. So that's why I think I'll leave it, and then maybe I'll have a few more remarks once I've listened to our graduates. But that's how far the three speakers could provoke me. And then the question is, what are the views of our students? What do you think this mean to us as practitioners, as professionals, as scholars in human settlement? And for us to get appropriate answers to this question, I'll now call upon Sipo. Where's that thing now, Sipo? I think Sipo Kushene. Let me just get my script. I'll now call upon Pindokuse Skosana, who is a graduate from Nelson Mandela University, to give her response. Sikokuse, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for the organizers for having me here. So basically, to respond to what the professors were saying, I'm just going to share my brief experience as a human settlement graduate and how my journey came about of me being here. Basically, how I found out about the qualification was through reading a newspaper. Initially, I wanted to study town planning, but when I read about just reading the title, human settlement itself, I saw there was just some personal connection I had with the name itself without even reading what the degree entails of. I then applied to the university, the Nelson Mandela University, and I received, I was accepted, and through God's grace, I managed to also secure funding that would coming from the National Department of Human Settlements for the 4 years of my qualification. And I remember the way in which I was sparked, or what sparked my passion for human settlements. I'm not sure if Mr. Brendan Boyce remembers, but since we were being funded by National, they had came to the Nelson Mandela University to speak to us as students and just to empower us. And the one thing that he had mentioned was that, just be consistent in what you do. Everything you do, you need to be consistent. Even 80% of the time, be consistent 80% of the time, and the 20%, life happens. But 80% of the time, be consistent, and in everything you do, just make sure you put your best and your fullest amount and potential in what you do. And that's exactly what I did. My first year, I was not doing really well. Although I had a passion for human settlements, I wasn't sure about what exactly I wanted to specialize in, and what exactly is it, what is my purpose, what is my intention. And through that talk and through attending these conferences and hearing professionals and hearing people's experience, I began to find my passion. And because the degree itself offers so much learning in terms of actually going out into the world and gaining the necessary experience as a student to take out and go as a professional to do. In our 4th year, we were required to do a research project. I started mine was basically based on rural development, rural to urban migration. And through doing rural to urban migration, there were the topics that we were just speaking about in terms of capacity building, and in terms of informal settlements. There's a very big connection between informal settlements and rural developments, because most of the time you find that people who live in informal settlements are people that come or have homes in Makaya, in rural areas, but come to the cities, to look for jobs. Hence why we focus so much on urbanization. And myself, I saw a problem with, why, there's so much emphasis on urbanization. Why are we not looking at rural development? And I was like, what is then sustainable rural development? Is there even a definition that speaks to sustainable rural development? And there isn't, because even when you read the municipal integrated development plans, which normally is taken from the National Development Plan, rural areas are very different. They're very diverse. They can't be similar or the same strategies to try and achieve sustainable human settlements or human settlements in rural areas or rural development. And then I did my master's in construction management, but also with a focus on rural settlements, looking at sustainable rural human settlements. And that is where I learned, I did my master's in Kwamapumulo. I spent a lot of time there. That's where my mom also used to work, and that's where I would engage with communities. I began, to see the situation, to see the life that they live. And as much as, it was very heartbreaking, because there's so much I wanted to do, there's so much I want to say. So I decided to take that and then put it in my master's. So some of the things that I learned in rural communities is that, I was doing my study and I was at the municipal offices, and there were people queuing, and I'm starting to talk to these people who see, what are they doing here, what's going on? Like, no, Sipiu Mkhaso. I'm like, oh, Mkhaso is we basically giving, they've been giving houses for free by the government. So Omuluma was just like, no, yazi, angidingi. but I'm here because it's free. And then, you start wondering, what problems are we then addressing? Are we then addressing the right problems as professionals? Here is a woman, and here are people waiting to get free houses, but these free houses are not improving the quality of their lives. They just see this as, oh, it's free, it's a freebie. It's not going to help me in any way. So what are the things as professionals, or what are the things that the municipality or government and the private sector itself could we then bring or join to, to see things differently? Because most of the times in my research and, in my studies, you notice, and through communicating with people from those communities, you find that they don't want what we are providing. We are not speaking to their needs, and because we are not speaking to their needs, we are not addressing problems. The housing backlog is growing. It's not declining. We are not sorting it out. It's growing. Things are changing. So we need to find different approaches, and we really need to define. And I think municipalities themselves need to start defining what is sustainable human settlements in their areas. We need to look at what's missing in areas differently. We cannot have the same plan. We cannot have the same function for this, for all the different areas, because different areas come with different challenges. And again, while I was working, I had the privilege of also working in the private sector. I was working as a construction project management intern, and while I was there, there's so many. Although I was in the project space, there's so many issues that I saw that I had no idea of. Not that I didn't know, but the technical aspects or the technical difficulties that actually come with managing projects. And with managing projects, or with any project, there's going to be a community that is going to be impacted. There's going to be a community that is going to be involved and that's going to want to be involved. How do we then find ways to include them in development spaces without just them feeling as if we are forcing these developments in them? And one of the ways that they tried to achieve that was that in the surrounding areas that they are developing, they conducted a research study to see there was an informal settlement that the community started building across a development that was going on, because the area is classified as one of the areas that are going to be developed or transformed in the future, and the process of that development has already started. So people are building houses to be closer to work, and they did a study to investigate whether these people actually wanted temporary housing, or do they want permanent housing. 90% of them just wanted housing that is temporary, because but they have their homes, they have amakaya that they go to, they are just here for work. So, those are the type of issues that, you start seeing and you start facing. And again, in my research, in the rural development or the rural communities, there's a lot of political influence in the structure, a lot of political influence in the structure. You find people speaking about, hey, we don't have water because we did not vote for this particular party. We don't have this because, or the councillor died, or, got shot because they are of this party. Now we cannot fulfill their duties. And it's things like that where you start realizing that there's just so much as human settlement professionals, as housing professionals, that we need to do. And there's so much space for us to go into and occupy. And I just want to, and I hope to encourage everyone to just never stop trying. We all here and we all share a common interest.
And I hope we all someday meet again, and we continue meeting again, and we continue to share ideas and our experiences, as students, and hopefully outside when we meet as professionals again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kosana. I'll now go straight to Ms. Mary Ambuyele. She is graduate from the University of Fort Hare.
Yes.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Ms. Ambuyele, an enthusiastic graduate of the University of Fort Hare. I graduated in 2019. I was one of the pioneers of our qualification. And then currently I'm doing my master's in rural development in the University of Fort Hare, East London, and also employed as an immigration officer at the Department of Home Affairs in Cape Town. But originally I am from Queenstown. First of all, I'd like to start by saying I appreciate this platform, because first off, the butterflies that I have experienced thinking about me having to stand in front of all of you guys. Thank you so much for that. And then secondly, when I found out about the program, it was such a coincidence, because initially I had applied to study sociology at Fort Hare. Then when I got there in 2015, Mr. Mongwe was the person who informed me of the program, and therefore I then changed my mind and entered into the human settlement program. So when I got into it and I got to learn about it, I became very enthusiastic. I was so enthusiastic to the point that I graduated with cum laude. I was both an enthusiastic student as a graduate, because whilst studying, I recognized the intricate role that we play within the government. I also recognized the intricate role that we play in human settlements in general, because human settlements are not just about housing, as was mentioned earlier. We play a big role in where people live, where people play, and where people work. So we foster a more multi-dimensional approach to housing as opposed to the Department of Housing. And then secondly, while at the universities, it was so disheartening to just find out the type of challenges that we face as students as well as graduates. For example, as enthusiastic as I was, I found that there was a lack of support from the department as well as other departments. Because while studying, I discovered that this qualification is not just a human settlements-based qualification, it is more broader, and I think it's very important and intricate for us to be able to communicate that to other departments as well. This is not just a qualification that could just assist and develop the human settlements department, but also other government departments as well. For example, I'm an immigration officer at the Department of Home Affairs, and whilst entering that space, I then recognized just how deep a need exists for us to enter such spaces as human settlements practitioners. Also, I recognize the fact that our qualification is fairly new, so not a lot of people know about it, not a lot of institutions, not a lot of departments recognize it and they know about it, but I do, however, believe that a lot could be done to foster that. And also I believe by us then facilitating that process of engagement between our department and other departments, we could also better solve problems such as the incapacity that was mentioned earlier. It's important for us to be able to show people our niche, because they do not recognize it. And you find that in other provinces, even within the municipal office itself, they do not recognize our qualification, they hear it in passing. Therefore, that makes it difficult for us as graduates to then enter those spaces. Also, it makes it difficult for them to then include us in spaces where we should be present. We need to be able to influence solutions within government. We need to be able to influence solutions privately. And I think it's also important for the department to then include us both at a national level and a local, provincial and a local level. And then, also, whilst doing my qualification, I recognized that this qualification not only forces me as a human settlements practitioner to recognize the apartheid spatial patterns as well as its consequences, but the fact that land has different meanings to different population groups. And like my colleague mentioned earlier on, I think that a lot of people, when they hear human settlements, they immediately think urban areas, urban dwellings, and just basically urban areas. But human settlements is so much broader. It is so much deeper to the extent that it forces us to then recognize the different meanings that people attach to land. For example, as someone that lives in the location, when you see a plot of land, obviously you would attach physical value to it. But to a person that is in the rural areas, that person sees land for grazing. That person will see land for koluka maybe. And you'll find that other people will see that land as just natural land for them to collect herbs for people like traditionalists. So then it's important for us as the Department of Human Settlements to recognize that land means different things to different people, and therefore be able to communicate that to the different municipalities that we need to enter. And also, when it comes to the gap between theory and implementation, I do want to say without conviction that the people that are sitting in this room can be able to bridge that gap. Honestly, we can be able to bridge that gap because we know human settlements problems at a more multidisciplinary approach. We don't just focus on engineering, we don't just focus on project management, we don't just focus on public administration, but rather we're able to then put all of those things together and then understand that they're interlinked and the type of role that we need to play in order to make sure that those things are fostered and therefore they run smoothly. Also, I need us to recognize that other departments don't just recognize us. Also, then that causes us to be then unable to foster solutions. For example, I'm doing my study in a small village in Kokodala. I don't know if you guys know Kokodala in Queenstown. I'm currently focusing on mining and then resistance to mining on rural land because of the type of meanings that people attach to land, which are then opposed to what mining companies would attach to that land. But when they see that land, they'll obviously see land to be mined, whilst those people have their own meanings that are attached to it, some of which I mentioned earlier. And then, whilst doing that, I recognize that the type of skills needed to be able to communicate that both at a local level and a provincial level, and also at municipalities where we need to be able to influence municipal IDPs so that those things are interlinked with the solutions that are provided to the people, so that it doesn't get to a point where there's resistance. We need to be proactive, and I believe that us being proactive will then come from the students that are sitting in here being able to enter those spaces. Also, my qualification has also allowed me to recognize the fact that solutions to, like my colleague was mentioning, solutions to problems that communities face need to come from them. So a lot of stakeholder engagement needs to happen. And I believe that we as the graduates of human settlements, will be able to foster those stakeholder engagements so that when we do provide solutions to these type of communities, we can provide solutions that they have agreed to, they are then part of, and they have fostered as well. So that also is a major thing. And then I also need the department to then foster conversations or foster spaces where we can find institutions that are like-minded, institutions that are more multidisciplinary and not more insular. We need to not try and fit into a basket or then continue going with the flow as to what exists now in public service. I can tell you now, it's very difficult to enter a space as a young graduate. It's very difficult to enter a department where you find that they'll tell you, oh, you must relax, this is how things function. Things take months here, and that is very disheartening and very discouraging to graduates, but that doesn't then mean that we do not have the ability to be able to foster those solutions. And also, when it comes to us then allowing people to be able to be part of solutions, I'd like to also mention our second speaker, when he said that we should rather regulate backyard shacks instead of us turning away against them. In 2018, Statistics SA, I think, they said that in Cape Town, in the city of Cape Town, 18 new families entered the city and installed shacks on a daily basis. So now if you think about the Department of Human Settlements and that type of growth and that type of influx into informal settlements, we can look at it and say that we will not be able to meet the demand for housing the way that we're doing. 18 new families doesn't mean 18 new people a day. There's many members in the family. So if there's 18 times 5 people that are building a shack every day, to some point we're not going to be able to meet that demand when it comes to housing. So it's important for us to look at less conventional ways to solve problems. We need to be able to be flexible in the sense that we need to find solutions that are current, because at the time when policies to solve that problem were developed, they didn't foresee at the time this type of growth. So therefore it is important for us as human settlements practitioners to be able to be flexible and recognize that the times are changing and be able to then influence policies, directives and circulars to try and facilitate such circumstances. And municipalities are ready to foster such solutions? I doubt. I don't think our municipalities are able to foster solutions fast enough to then bridge the gap between the current problems that we have. We cannot, I don't believe that our municipalities currently, they can eradicate the problems that we have when it comes to informal settlements and backyard shacks, but rather, with us included, we could find a way to just lessen the problems. But we need to be able to enter those spaces. And of course, there are some sections within the government that we cannot, for example, we cannot influence how long supply chain and procurement take. Those things have their own processes that they have to follow. We cannot influence those. But rather, we should be able to look for permanent solutions while fostering temporary solutions to problems, so that we don't become a reactive department, rather one that is proactive. And I think for now that those are all the issues that I will address. Then I'll open the floor to other people to engage.
Thank you, Ms. May and Ms. Kosala. I think what I'm hearing from the two speakers here, colleagues, is the question of how much do we know? How much do we know in terms of the housing need of people who either reside in these informal settlement backyard dwellings, but also those who queue in our government offices daily. Do you understand? We know their housing need. Have we done proper diagnosis of why they are where they are today? Or we just fishing? Another question there is, how much do you know about our new qualification in human settlement? Seemingly, most companies, seemingly most institutions, including government, department, know little about this qualification. So what are we doing to market this qualification? Are we sitting back and hope one day when we wake up, people say, yeah, we know about this thing now. So we need to do something. We need to get our hands dirty in terms of getting this program out there and to be known. So that people stop asking us, what is human settlement in what is this qualification? What is this? What does it mean? What does it entail? So I think that is kind of what I'm getting from this. Manga, I'm looking at my watch. I think we have slightly gone beyond our schedule. 5 minutes into someone's territory now. I'm not sure, Prof, what do we do now? Can I still just extra 5 minutes of their time, Mr. Boy?
Prof, through you, I'm sure the the floor would like to comment.
That's what I'm asking, yes.
So, yeah.
So, I mean, how much should I give so that I don't really step on other people's toes? I'm not sure what's the next after this. What is...
Prof, we break for the day at 4:30.
Okay, so maybe I can just take 10 minutes of that time. Okay, perfect. Colleagues, through my organizers here, we have 10 minutes that we can, through which you can engage with the presentations, both by our scholars, but also our graduates. So I think, I'm not sure whether we have that mic, but, okay, perfect. Colleagues, I will see by show of hands, and then I'll send somebody to you so that you are able to express yourself. Those who have got something to say, they will raise their hands, and then I'll then direct the mics to where you are. Show of hands. 1 here, 2 there, 3, Dr. K. 1 here, just in front of me. You just tell us your name, where you come from, and then you shoot.
Thank you very much. Is it on? Yes, that's my name. Greetings to the House. It's an honor to speak to my fellow peers. Don't want to waste time. My name is Ugutelonke Watuntuli. I'm a Geography and Environmental Management graduate, currently studying towards my Masters of Housing at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Let me respond to some of the topics that were engaged from our speakers. It's a privilege to have them because we always read their work, so it was really exciting. I would like to start out by saying that we are generally an incapacitated nation when it comes to housing information. Why am I saying this? When we look at the education system from a high school or even a primary school level, in other countries, housing is an essential need that is seen as a basic necessity. When we teach children about the necessity of water, why aren't housing practitioners wanting to teach young people about housing at the basic level? Why do I say that it's necessary to teach it at that level? It is because by the time Mfana is 17 years old, he believes that being a man is going and building a shack somewhere so that he gains his independence. And so when we're saying that 18 families go and build shacks, I see that as something that can be addressed by other departments, and this is why we need interdepartmental conversations at this very moment. How do, when I look at my role within the housing sector, someone might say I want to be a project manager. My niche at its core is within youth development and gender empowerment, because those are the vulnerable groups right now. Think about when you were first year, did you ever wonder where you would live? The hours you spend outside the housing department because no one has ever taught you about your housing rights. Right now, students are bathing as housing students. What is our role right now in our institutions of higher learning? We cannot be discussing a housing crisis and we have housing students who are registered. We should be taking up that space, advancing this theme of sustainable housing, fair housing in our institutions of higher learning. And so if we have academics within this space, that is the type of capacity I'm talking about at this level. Do we have the capacity to address this? Of course we do. If we have people who are getting into SRC, I was the SRC president at one point, and you realize Zilala is saying that we are now fighting for our rights by sleeping on the floor. Where were our housing graduates? What is the voice? What are the rights? I'm just saying that as young people think that we need training. I think that we need to identify our niche. If you want to be a project manager, go right into it. But you are nothing short of being capacitated. What needs to happen is for this country to start knowing that we exist and for them to start recognizing that we're not fighting for positions with town planners. We know what we have to offer. Create the space for me to tell you what value I carry. And so I don't want to waste time, but I'm just saying, we are more than ready to take up space. Funding is available. The previous minister, Lindu Sisulu, said that she's committing to channeling the funding. Where is the funding right now? We can't be having redundant conversations about including our graduates in spaces. We don't have time. We are graduating and then we are staying in Makai. It can't be that we keep having the same conversations. Someone gets a short intention. Money is available. What's not available right now is adults who are rising up and saying, enough is enough. We can't have young people at Makaya when there's a housing crisis. They have the solutions. Include them in the system. And please don't exploit them. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Umabondi Moto. I'm a graduate from the University of Fort Hare.
Okay.
There's a lot that's been said, Prof, but I think I want to probe a question, more especially to what the second speaker was saying in formalizing the backyard. My issue, or my question is, what about the infrastructure building? Because if we enhance and approve that, like for instance what is happening in Alice. Alice was built as a small town that was created for the elite that were informed by the policies of that particular time. It's 25 years now into democracy. The same water and education systems are the same that were created 100 years ago. We've got thousands and hundreds of people, even in varsity, we've got new residences, but the same infrastructure is the same. That is why, as Prof. Mufung was saying, extent that there's water crisis in Alice, because we are allowing, or we are expanding houses or housing of people, and yet there is no infrastructure building. There is no maintenance of infrastructure. Now we allow these people, we build these houses, and then if there is not enough sanitation, we are failing on the SDGs, the sixth one, that speaks of access to clean water and sanitation. And secondly, now we are exposing our people, then we are not creating, sustainable human settlements. Now at the end of the day, instead of answering the question, we are building more problems to the question. Now the question here, sir, and I think it's a past, present, and a future question up until it's answered, the issue of capacity. And if the third speaker is speaking on the issue of land, right? Even there, there's going to be an issue of capacity, because even right now here in East London, where the houses are built there, it's far from towns. And the reason why people left their villages and left their nice towns to come to East London was for work. And now we move them from the shacks, we take them 30 kilometers away from the towns. We are creating another problem on top of another problem. Because what's going to happen is that if I came here for work and I must pay 50 rands a day to travel to work, I'm going to come back and be a burden on the system, because I'm going to come back and build a shack close to where I work. Now we should be tabling into discussion, I think what you were saying also, interdepartmental discussions, where we are saying we are going to build a settlement. We call it economic development. How can we develop the economy of Kwaku to pass so that we are able to create a settlement that will be able to sustain itself economically? Because what is happening now is that people are getting those houses, they are renting them out to make a living, because they need to make a living. You see, so we need to come to a place where we are building housing, shelter, but we speak to the economy of the place, we speak to the education, so that whatever we are doing, it becomes sustainable, instead of creating a recurring questions that are never answered. Thank you.
I see everyone standing, so I guess I need to stand. I am, oh my God, I never want to do the title. I'm Thandeka Kaur, an academic at the University of Fort Hare, and I think the second speaker has just touched on what I was going to raise, which I'm not even sure whether it was a question or it was just a point, or I'm just raising up. To the second speaker, the second prof, who touched on backyard dwelling. And for me, I've been looking into this and trying to write around this area, where one we do really, especially in the issues around COVID-19, where backyard dwelling has become another survival strategy in terms of unemployment for those who are unemployed. This is now a strategy, and as much as it's a positive, we can look at it in two ways. It's a positive thing, and as it's a survival strategy, but mine is an issue of accountability of municipalities, because the reason why we have the Municipal Demarcation Board who's targeted, amongst the many roles, is to redemarcate the spatial boundaries of within municipalities, but also provincial. And one of the reasons there is that it's issues of accountability, downsizing, ensuring that municipalities are able to cater to the needs of their communities. And for me now, looking into the backyard dwelling, more people are coming into this town of East London, and yes, it's providing shelter for those, and it actually prohibits issues of new squatter camps and informal settlement. But in the same light, we're looking into, is the municipality able to cater to these people, the accountability of the municipality, and the demand on the resources that the second speaker has touched, housing, infrastructure, water, and all of that. Do we look at, mine is to actually, as much as we're looking into backyard dwelling, as much as we see it in a positive light, but also look into the issues around municipality accountabilities in terms of downsizing and being able to cater to the numbers, and also issues of infrastructure. And I've been fortunate because I'm working in Alice, and exactly what the colleague has just raised. If you look at the Alice town, it is under so much constraints. It's even, especially with the university town, being a university town with a university of 40, it's even very hard to find accommodation, even as a staff. But also, again, backyard dwelling has become a solution, or informal settlement. Do we look into this? How does, and we have a shortage of water, shortage of everything, especially everything in South Africa is now a shortage, we're even on load shedding as we speak. Do we, as we looking towards this backyard dwelling, we need to find ways of regulating this in terms of assisting municipalities, in terms of capacity and accountability. Thank you.
I think that was the first. I think that was the first round of the Q&A session, colleagues. I'm not sure that it's. I can see one hand at the back there. We are now drawing close to closure now. One there, another one here, two here. Yeah, but start there, right at the back. Because I think the question is we are here till 4:30. So we are left with 10 minutes. And if you could just try to be as brief as possible, that would be great so that we can all participate.
Okay, good morning, colleagues. I regard every beginning as the morning. First time speaking, and it's my morning. My name is Chipiri, my name is Chibasa. I'm commonly known as Chiti from the Department of Human Settlements, Provincial, Eastern Cape. Colleagues, I have been listening attentively from the beginning of the conference, and I can assure you I am also a long-term student in human settlements, and a committed one. I have been exposed, or let me say I am a son of Prof. Mbanga, and I've been exposed to the space of the so-called environmental human settlements. And my concern is more on how can we build a sustainable human settlement with all the resources that we are having, including the students, the professionals, or the practitioners that are already in the space, our departments, communities. I'm talking about the integration, because we cannot achieve sustainable human settlements without it being integrated with all those role players, which include our environment. We are speaking about the backyard sharks, we are speaking backlogs, and colleagues, it is very much important because we have got the so-called Mother Earth, who is our life support system, wherein you cannot get a building material without them. It is important, colleagues, that when we speak backyard sharks, we have to think, where do a person who build a shark get that material from? Are they recycling? Are they also helping our environment in terms of the pollution or what? Colleagues, are we teaching our students to go out there and create jobs? Is there anyone of our students here who can challenge me and say, I have got a model that is ready to sell, not in South Africa, but outside of the country, whether it's a theoretical model or whether it's a physical model, to solve the problem that we are having? Because we are speaking of the so-called the self-help housing. Now, I just want to give that because it is important, even though I'm speaking backyard shop, for instance, there is a bigger picture that we have to be looking at. The issue of climate change that we are facing today, we are talking about the issue of the retrogression of carbon emission. As I am about to submarine chairperson, allow me to speak about the responsibility that we have in making sure that all the students that comes out here, they don't have to go out there and cry, there is no job, but cry, how best can we create jobs? And being rural biased, because I did my master's in rural development, for sure within the space of innovation in human settlements. Colleagues, do we believe that we can retrogress the so-called rural to urban migration due to already the low-hanging fruits that we have in our spaces? There is some guys who develop a sanitation system that is very compatible with rural space where you can flush. Can we develop the skills there and create the cohorts of businesses within that space and see our people staying and enjoying their rural space? Thank you, Chairperson.
Just next to me here. I think got the last two, and then I'll give my colleague here to wrap it up for us.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Greetings to the House at large. I'm not sure if I'm going to pose a question or try to explore other directions, because what's happening now is we're trying to solve an issue of housing, and we are trying to also explore other methods that are going to help us to solve this issue, such as garden flats. But I think we need to rather reverse the issue that leads to us having to build houses, because you will understand that these people come from rural areas and then they come to form informal settlements, and then we will say that the reason is job hunting. Most of them, they will say that they are job hunting. So how about we rather develop the rural areas, bring the economic activity to the rural areas? Why don't we instead attract them back to the rural areas? Because it's been more than 25 years trying to solve the same issue with good solutions, because the implementation of the UISP, the implementation of the RDP did not fail just because it was not a good policy, but because we are not really going to the root of the problem. Rather, we are solving the problem that is on the surface. So how about we attract people back to where they come from? If the UISP says that I'm going to either relocate people or insert them when I'm upgrading their informal settlements, it means that they are going to consult with the police, they are going to consult with the hospitals, they are going to consult with the schools, and when they are doing that, they are also doing job creation in some way, because when they're saying that they are going to bring in police to the new upgraded informal settlements, then they are not going to take the police that already exist in the CPTs, rather they are going to employ more people. So why don't they do that in the rural areas instead, so that people can just go back to where they come from? Thank you.
Dr. Asa behind you. Come on here.
Yeah, after.
Okay.
Good day, everybody. My name is Lakani Mkabuki, so you pardon me. I'm a little nervous.
But Prof, I don't want to impose a question, but I want to comment on one of the areas that one of our speakers touched into, and you mentioned that why don't we actually focus on getting solutions to this problem that we have in the Department of Housing? I mean, we all know that the housing backlog is raising each and every year in South Africa. So I really wanted to say that I think it is time for us as colleagues, as the Department of Human Services, to actually go back to the drawing board, to understand what development means. Because if we go back to the drawing board and to understand what development means, we understand that development does not only revolve around you as a person that is to build this development, but it also has to have a sphere to the person that you're about to give this development into. I think one of the reasons why we're actually facing a lot of problems is because we tend to cater development that people don't need. And that becomes a problem because a lot of states' funds get misused in that process. So I think that it's important for us to go back to the drawing board and maybe to understand or to account into knowing what actually development is. I wanted to say that.
So, Dr. Azaye, and then we come to the colleague in front here, and then that's where we are going to end it before I get into trouble with my...
Thank you very much, Prof. What I have to say, I'm not sure if it's a question or it's food for thought, especially to our graduates. But before I proceed, I would like to give you guys these brief statistics. The population of our country today stands at 58.8 million. Out of that population, you have 17.84 million that are youth. When I talk of youth, I talk of individuals between the age of 17 and 34. That translates to 30.34%. And the population of the adults from the age of 35 to 65, that is the working age, is about 15.88 million. That translates to 27%. If you look at that statistics, we all somehow want to be incorporated in the system. We have become so dependent upon the system that we are actually failing to see what we can bring to the system. If I look at our students, most of them talk about pursuing a master's degree in planning, pursuing a master's degree in structural engineering. I haven't heard any one of them mention entrepreneurship in human settlement. And that's the area where I'm so concerned. Because when you talk about entrepreneurship in human settlement, you talk about you bringing something to the field, not depending on the field to give you something. And that is where we are actually lacking. The government cannot consume, absorb all of us. It is high time we bring something to the table. So, my point is, going forward, while we are so energetic to pursue a master's degree, please, like one of our speakers said, this degree is a multidisciplinary degree where you have niche areas in project management, in structural engineering, and all the likes. Let's try to look at that niche area where we can incorporate entrepreneurship in human settlement. Take into consideration that financial background aspect of our studies, because the banks today is the highest employment entity of all the sectors, among all the sectors. And banks are looking for students who have got your background. You study that with your knowledge in finance because you are the ones to draft those proposals You are the one to deliver these projects. If you assess any project from a financial point of view, I think you stand a better chance to get such a project to be approved as compared to someone who has gotten no background in finance, but yet you have this idea of a project, but you can't put that project in financial terms. It gives those who are to sponsor such a project nightmare, because they have a figure that they perceive based on their experience, but you have yours, and there is just that gap where you cannot actually pass your message through, you cannot pass your idea or your knowledge through, because what they perceive is not what you actually have in mind. So there is that gap between what you have, what you know, and what you intend to contribute, and what the sponsors that you want them to sponsor your project, what they perceive and what they know. Okay? And lastly, I would like to pose this question or this to our chairman. It's just that I'm not so keen with his name, with his identity. The chairman of is it IHSP. With reference to what most of our speakers have said here today, my question will go to him and let him take this very proactive. Thank you.
Otherwise, we'll actually have a problem with our organizers here. What I want to propose is that maybe engage outside this forum. Remember, this is a conference. It's not only about this formal city. We are able to engage beyond this city. That's what a big conference, a successful conference. Otherwise, if you've got everything here, you've got nothing to see outside. And it's going to be boring. So let's come here and then give my brother here quickly, and then we take it out.
Thank you very much. May I please sit?
No problem.
Thank you very much. I had about 7 points. 2 of them have been taken. However, I really would want to state that the last speaker took one of my points, and I'm very grateful that there was a clear articulation of the need for us to understand that there is an entire world out there waiting for these young people, not just government. But the question is, what is it that we as government and the academics doing to prepare these young people to take their spaces as entrepreneurs, not tenderpreneurs, real business people who can create stuff. That's very important. As much as there was an eloquence in terms of articulating that particular, it doesn't absorb the role of government in actually making sure that the ground is fertile for these young graduates to actually become entrepreneurs. It's important that we do that. And he then posed the question to me, his last input. We will engage after this in terms of that question. Let me then come to my points that I wanted to actually make. For me, there are 2 things that I will lay the foundation for. One, in our articulation and coming up with suggestions for policy change and how we begin to change the current situation, we must understand one fundamental. Movement of people is as old as human beings themselves. For whatever reason. Right now the reason might be jobs. 1,000 years ago, there might have been a different reason. In future, the reason for migration will be water, because water is slowly getting scarce. So when we begin to conceptualize, let's not come up with strategies that chase people away. That begins to say that, yeah, let's understand where these people come from, and therefore let's go to where they come from and stop them from going wherever they want to go. that is a very problematic articulation of things. People will always move to wherever they want to move. You've got a crisis right now in Europe where they are stopping our African brothers and sisters from going there. They forgot that they colonized us. And we don't have anywhere to go. If I were to migrate because of a crisis in South Africa, I would go straight to Britain or probably Holland. Guys in the Congo must go to Belgium and so on. So they shouldn't stop us because we didn't stop them. So the movement of people will always be there. That's the first aspect. The second aspect is the issue of the alternative building technology as we are coming up with alternative solution in the building of our human settlements and in an integrated way and sustainable way and things like that. There are two elements in these things. The first one is that there is a high level of reluctance in government adopting alternative building technology. And there are many reasons to that effect as well. Part of it is that people on the ground, if you were to build RDPs with that, they will reject it. They have. I've got first-hand experience in Gauteng. They call it shares, they call it all sorts of things. It leads me to a second issue on alternative building technology. Those people who come up with the solutions they will just want to use government to do marketing for them. They need to get out there and say, here is a settlement, let me build 4 units and so on, so that people can see this thing. So there is a serious need for collaboration between government and private sector and those entrepreneurs for future solutions. And things can't be centered on the shoulders of government with all its corruption and all the nonsense that's going on. Now let me come to my points, which are 3, by the way. The first one is that the energy that I'm picking up here is absolutely correct and it's needed. I would like to emphasize that it needs to be channeled to relevant directions and sources and so on. Right now we are all converted. We are just preaching to ourselves on things that we already know and so on and things like that. At high school, my principal used to shout at us at assembly that we always come late, but we were there in front of him. The latecomers were outside the gate. Now, you don't want that situation. We need to channel the discussion properly, which is why I would appeal to the board of the institute that we package the report of this 3-day workshop and we deliver it physically to the minister. That's the first part of it. With all the issues that the students have raised and so on and things like that and the recommendations, we deliver it as a board to the minister and we will appeal for a 3-hour session where we actually engage directly with her on the things that would have emerged and where we think the sector needs to go. We will partly be directing the energy in the right space. 2, part of what we need to ask the minister to do, there are things called children parliament and all these kinds of parliaments that they do. It's time we have a specific session on human settlement which will afford these young people to tell Cyril Ramaphosa what to do. The minister must assist us to get the leaders of these young people to go to parliament and engage on human settlement matters. That is important. It is something that then we will be channeling. There should be businesses as well, because these people can't be absorbed by government. There's businesses that need to absorb them. There are other agencies that, NHBRC and all these kinds of people that need to actually listen to all these things that are being said here. So that would have covered the 2 points. The other point that I would like us to actually understand this too, and then I will close. There's a particular element that in government is called IGR, intergovernmental relations. Housing delivery is entangled in IGR. The national department develops and drafts policy. The provincial department implements human settlement. The locals, given others are metros, they will be given the powers and function to roll out human settlement, but they are still at the mercy of the province. But the primary function that resides at localities is to actually basically, if we are beginning to be technical, to approve the plans, township establishment and so on and all those things. Without the collaboration and the realization and the effective functioning of this animal calls intergovernmental relation, we are not going to go anywhere. The policies are good, they may want to address these particular issues that we do. They come to the province at provincial level, people there decide which project to fund and not to fund, whether they've got interest there or not, and all sorts of things that, and the perceptions that are actually there. You go to the municipality where the town planning processes take 6 years if that municipality is effective. Remember, the municipalities now can't pick up papers on the road. They can't clean the streets. They can't provide the most basics of services. That's how crippled our government is. And there is a need to also engage at that level to ensure that we raise this consciousness in terms of it frustrating the processes of actually transforming the human settlement space and the sector, and ensure that it begins to be responsive to the challenges that we have. The last issue is that I really would like a situation where the academics in all the universities that they've got, they find themselves in, to have the MOUs or whatever document you want to call with the locals in which they find themselves. This institution, Fort Hare, must have an MOU with the municipality where it is located. And that MOU must begin to say, as the university, we are providing you with proper capacity. Probably we may not need that much, but we've got people here who can do the research for you, who can do the IDP for you. You must read IDPs of some municipalities. I don't know, they would have been written by Form 1. But they would not know Form 1, these young people. Prof and I would know. So, but those partnerships will begin to increase the capacity at local levels almost free of charge. But probably the localities will refuse because they want to have their own thing going in terms of who get into particular spaces and so on. But this is a good opportunity to ensure that as institutions, we have partnership with local municipalities and we are able to provide them with knowledge, statistics at a local level, so that that begins to direct their development planning, economic planning, road planning, human settlement planning, and so on. It influences the direction of the IDP. If we are to do those things, I think we will move in the right direction towards starting to deal with this problem of human settlement, and it will be a good trajectory. I would like to close on that note. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think we have come to the end of this session. Otherwise, Mr. B will stay here till, I think we really heard the comments, we have heard the inputs, all valuable, all, making academic sense. And I hope Tango has been taking notes so that we can do as advised in terms of submitting to the relevant authority. Maybe before I call on either from Mbanga or Mr. Voice to come and make a few announcements if there are any, let me continue this by saying thank you to the two professors, from Europe, from Mr. Geya, from Idimisha, and the two graduates, Ms. Mary and for their wonderful presentation. Colleagues, all that I'm hearing from this program, or this gathering, there are kinds of questions. It's quite interesting to hear the views and ideas from our students. And it tells one thing of it, that we actually did the right kind of investment. Because the output is as good as the input. And if we hear this kind of challenging ideas and all that, then know that the right work has been done somewhere. And that then leads me to this concluding remark to say, while we are talking of capacity and many other issues, another thing that must also deal with in this space, human settlement, is the leadership. Do we have the right kind of leadership in academia to undertake this kind of research that I'm hearing from the audience? Do we have the right kind of leadership in the private sector? Because for us to come up with what we call integrated human settlement, that speaks to public-private partnership. Do we have the right kind of leadership in government itself? Do we have the right kind of leadership in communities themselves? So these are the questions that we have to grapple with for us to arrive at particular conclusion, but also the right kind of solutions. With those few remarks, Tando, that one is yours. And thank you for being such a wonderful meeting.
Thank you very much, Prof. Colleagues, we will stop now or break, and then we will go and refresh. We will come back after 2 hours, which is 6:30 from now, for the gala dinner. Thank you very much.
It's going to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be here. We are going to sit down.